Rabia Khedr, welcome to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
I am excited to join you.
Rabia Khedr. So
Yes.
we have the joy of welcoming Rabia today to the podcast. So she is a passionate advocate for equity, justice, and inclusion, particularly for people with disabilities and diverse communities. She serves on the Accessibility Standards Canada Board, the Ontario Human Rights Commission,
I
and
used to.
oh, used to. These are
Yeah.
former.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the ministry's disability advisory group, is that former as
That's current. Yes.
oh, this is current.
Yeah.
As the National Director of Disability Without Poverty and CEO of DEEN Support Services. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
She's also a co-founder of Race and Disability Canada, Race and Disability Canada. So, and a motivational speaker. She has earned awards like the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for her humanitarian work. Wow, Rabia, great work.
Thank you.
So the first question is, you've been championing disability rights work for over 25 years now. What do you think inspired you to start the journey? What was the catalyst, and how has it evolved?
You know what? Just kind of funny that I never planned to work in on disability issues. It wasn't intentional. It was just sort of coincidental and meant to be, and I found my purpose. As a person with a disability, I always said I have enough of it personally in my life with my own lived experience and the lived experience of my family members, my siblings with disabilities. So I didn't want to make a profession out of it, but I'm a very spiritual, faith-based sort of person, and in that context, I say, God had a purpose for me in this world, and I followed it.
Yeah. And, sometimes our life paths are so unpredictable, right? It finds us,
Yeah,
and sometimes more so than we find it.
exactly.
So, for listeners who may just be listening to the audio version, do you mind sharing a little bit more about your disability?
So I have a one-liner that I identify myself with. I always say, my name is Rabia Khedr. I'm a hyphen with many hijabs because I do cover my hair. I wear a headscarf. I am a Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, wife, mother, daughter of aging parents, sibling of people with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities, activist, advocate, systems disruptor, social entrepreneur, and I happen to have a disability. I'm blind. So I am a brown skinned Muslim woman who is blind.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, our next question comes directly from that background, right? How do you balance the needs of the Muslim community with the broader disability support initiatives?
Well, again, I working through my own lived experience. I apply my understanding and awareness to all the work that I do. So, recognizing that racialized people with disabilities are doubly or triply disadvantaged. So, barriers compound our lived experience given our identity. So, as a racialized woman, I face two barriers. Add the disability, it's three. As Muslim, because I'm visibly Muslim due to the rise of Islamophobia and sort of the general anti-faith sentiment in our societies of it's either secular or non. I face like multiple layers of disadvantage. And that just heightens the amount of barriers that I face in participation. So recognizing that, I apply that in the work that I do. I promote that in the conversations that I have. in things that I write about. I expand on those experiences and I make sure that we understand how power works and how power has to be shared in order to level the playing field for somebody like me.
Hmm. And especially with the representations, the identities you represent, I think it's so important to be visible and to be vocal, especially these days with a lot of the more extreme political views that are coming
Absolutely.
into the scene.
Yep.
So, as we confirmed from the bio, you are a current member of the Minister's Disability Advisory Group. What key policy changes do you advocate for at the federal level?
Well, from the get-go, I've been promoting an understanding of intersectionality because I'm the only one racialized person with a disability that's been a part of that group since inception.
Mm.
We do have a racialized minister now, and they're the who also has the diversity and inclusion portfolio, which is a good thing. But again, it's bringing it all together. What I try to, what I'm specifically working on, and that's a result of my role as national director with Disability Without Poverty, is advocating for the Canada Disability Benefit, that people with disabilities in this country should not be legislated into poverty, should not be subjugated to poverty, because we are a first world country. The government made a promise of a Canada Disability Benefit, and we built a movement with individuals with lived experience, families, caregivers, carers, allies, supporters, and the general public to make sure that that promise is honored and implemented in order to help disabled people thrive. And we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. So we've talked about indirectly about some of your background, with being a racialized individual with disabilities. Now let's talk about that more generally. How do you think race and disability can be better addressed in Canada?
Well, again, it's organizations historically have been established by middle class white families of people with disabilities, and therefore are designed to cater to their needs. Over time, there's a recognition that we are a diverse society and we need to be more inclusive of cultural differences, religious differences, various forms of identities that people bring along with their lived experience of disability. Given that fact, organizations have attempted to, you know, learn a bit more, but has that paradigm shift happened in how services are delivered? No, it hasn't happened. And that's why we felt very strongly that we had to establish Race and Disability Canada as an initiative to help raise awareness, offering training and resources and research to really bring that change that organizations need in order to better serve disabled people from diverse communities on the ground.
Yeah, very well said. So now that we've talked a little bit about cultural competency, how can organizations better incorporate this into their disability support services?
Again, centering lived experience. So nothing about us without us. Disabled people from diverse backgrounds, different racial, cultural, spiritual backgrounds need to be involved in all aspects of the system of organizations in order to truly be able to effectively respond to the needs of racialized people with disabilities.
And do you feel like the laws that are in place, the implementation support systems that are in place is allowing for this to happen, enabling
Well,
this to
I
happen?
mean, we have the we have human rights codes that say, we can't discriminate on behalf of race and on behalf of gender and all the prohibited grounds for discrimination. We have equality provisions in the charter, but how they translate into policy and practice, there's still a gap, a significant gap. So racialized people with disabilities often find themselves on the outside, not fully included, even in disability spaces,
Hmm. Yeah.
where their disability might be understood, but their whole identity isn't necessarily recognized and responded to appropriately.
Yeah. So we're going to take a slight shift and narrow the lens a little bit, and talk about uh, your personal identity further as a blind person, as someone who is blind. How do you think that shapes your advocacy work?
Well, my joke has always been that I see things differently. I view every obstacle as an opportunity, and I speak truth to power. I'm not afraid of the dirty looks that people give me when I might say something that makes them uncomfortable. I call it like it is.
Hmm. And that's much needed. So I understand you have 4 kids, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you have 4 kids while managing your career and your advocacy work. Um, how does that influence your work-life balance? And then what are your tips for parents with disabilities like yourself?
Well, we can have it all, you know. I married a very supportive person who equally parented with me. Um, I had natural supports. I had my mom and dad helping me out along the way. Because of our careers, I was able to, pay my way a little bit to purchase services to help me. Because given my disability, I'm not eligible for nurturing assistance or home care and stuff like that. Because I can see, I don't need, like, I can't see, that's what I mean. I can't see, but I don't need personal care assistance. Like, I can physically, get dressed and do all that kind of stuff. Although I can't manage my laundry really well with kids, when they were young. Now my kids are adults. But when they were younger, I really did need a lot of support. And I worked really hard to gain that support around me. I was lucky. I know that that isn't the case for most people. And I actually documented some of this through narratives in a research report that I did uh, back in the early 2000s through a grant from the Canadian Centre for Disability Studies out of Winnipeg. Uh, it was parenting with a disability, diversity, barriers, and requirements that parents with disabilities, and particularly racialized parents with disabilities, because of their diverse, cultural contexts and experiences, tend to get married, tend to want to have children like their able-bodied family members, will more likely have more than one child. Regardless of the type of disability, all individuals with disabilities need a little bit of support in those early years of child rearing.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's, regardless if we have a disability or not, childcare.
That's true across the board. But those of us with disabilities just need a little more extra help around the house with our kids in order to ensure that they have the full experience that they need to have. Like I needed help with my children's homework. I needed help with people to read to my children.
Hmm. Yeah. And then let's move on to empowerment. How do you define true empowerment for individuals with disabilities? And how can society foster this empowerment beyond mere accommodation?
Well, if we truly embrace accessibility, that means we design with the intention of including people with disabilities. So we apply universal design principles, keeping disabled people in mind alongside everybody else so that nobody's necessarily left out. This way we will minimize the need for accommodation. There will always be a need for accommodation because there will always be unique circumstances. But if we start out with intentionally breaking down barriers right from the start, right from the design phase of a building, of a program, of a service, then we're including people as a starting point. And that will naturally empower people to participate. Empowerment, is often a term thrown around for people with disabilities. I think it's really about helping them discover their power and their passion, and find people around them who will lift them up and not drag them down. And we have to be, again, realistic about who we are, what our disability experience is, what barriers do we face, what barriers can we eradicate, what barriers are beyond our control, and find ways to contribute within ourselves. Like, we have to value ourselves as people with disabilities in order to be empowered to contribute to our families, community, and society.
Yeah, that's very well said. I think um, while that is true, it is at the same time being a person with a disability myself. So I use a manual wheelchair. When I was a toddler, I contracted the polio virus. And then in
Right,
addition, I also have severe scoliosis, which I've
right.
since had multiple surgeries for. So I was abandoned as a toddler, grew up in an orphanage for about 7 years. And what I'm trying to say with all of this is there is a lot of, for rather, if you grew up in an orphanage like myself, or you just grew up in a culture that is not accepting of people with disabilities,
Yep.
there's been a lot of just internalized negative programming and
Mm-hmm.
messaging. And it's a process. It's a long process to gain awareness of what negativity has been internalized, and coming out of that and being aware and choose differently.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think one of the most profound things in my life was meeting, somebody who shared my faith, who shared my skin tone, who was completely from a different part of the world, had a different disability. But that inspired me, seeing somebody that I saw having a more severe disability than me, quote unquote, because she was in a wheelchair. She was pretty, paraplegic, quadriplegic, um, doing so much. And I was so impressed. That was empowering to me to see somebody that I could, then have as a mentor. And I think a lot of times for disabled people, mentorship is lacking.
Yeah, I agree. I think there needs to be more mentorship and coaching. So the next few questions will be more reflective and philosophical than what's come before. Um, so how do you reconcile the tension between accepting oneself and striving for societal change?
Accepting oneself and striving for societal change.
Hmm.
Well, I think for me, really, it goes back to my faith. I'm a big believer in what's meant to be is meant to be, and through every difficulty comes ease. Now, my disability is just a fact of who I am. I don't want to see today because I won't know myself and I won't be able to do what I do. Because right now, I do what I have to do, the change that I want to see. I challenge the system in ways that I may not be able to do so if I was too busy seeing people's reactions to what I'm doing. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but for me, really, it's about, I'm pushing for that change that I want for everybody because I do believe in a better society, and I believe that we can get there, and I believe that I have a role to play in that. I have to do my part. It's my passion, it's my purpose.
Yeah, it's obvious with all the work that you've done and all the things that you're involved with that you are passionate. You're definitely proactive with
And I think what
making
I can
change.
add is, maybe if things didn't work out for me in life, I may not be as accepting of my disability. But I'm not saying it was easy every step of the way. I had my highs and lows, my trials and triumphs, but I got through it and things worked out for me for the best. And I think a lot of that also goes back to my convictions in terms of my, faith-based beliefs.
Yeah. So the next one is just as reflective in terms of how do you navigate the balance between individual responsibility and society obligation in creating an inclusive world?
Well, I recognize that, I may be able to do more, but somebody else with the same disability as me may not have the exact same lived experience as me, and I shouldn't have the same expectation of everybody around me. That each of us has our own disability experience and abilities to contribute, and we do our part to the best of our abilities.
Yeah, we do whatever part we can.
Yeah.
So, in your experience, how does one cultivate resilience in the face of systemic barriers and personal challenges?
I'm a visionary warrior. I I you know, when I feel right about something, I will fight for it. And sometimes I have to pick my battles. What do I fight for and what do I let go?
Hmm. Yeah. So, speaking of visionary, how do you envision a society that truly values people with disabilities? And what fundamental shifts in thinking are required to achieve this? I think this question comes from a place of, a lot of companies and a lot of places really talk about diversity and being inclusive and accessible. And sometimes those physical accommodations may be there to one degree or another, but attitudinally, it is psychologically is there's quite a gap and it is lacking.
Well, I think what we have to recognize is, society as a culture, human beings evolve and societies evolve.
Mhm.
So there's constant change and constant need for learning and relearning. So a one-off strategy to educate people on disability and inclusion and accessibility and equity and all that good stuff doesn't just make an organization respond to diversity and embrace it wholeheartedly. That it's ongoing work, and people need to recognize that it's not giving up anything for the majority. It's actually, it's about sharing, and it's good for everybody in society. When we give disabled people enough money, for example, to live with dignity, we are contributing to the health and well-being of our society as a whole.
Mhm.
I hope I'm making sense.
You are, you are definitely making sense. I think, when as you were talking, I was thinking of, the ramp, right? It works for people who are walking, it works for wheelchair users, it works for the person pushing in a child, a stroller, and
Yep,
really thinking of universal design. Sure, you're trying to accommodate a minority, but that solution could be utilized by everyone.
exactly.
Yeah. So the next question.
Exactly. And in reality, like we can learn from kids. Kids don't let differences bother them. They might point out a difference because it's just obvious difference. They're just describing it. But they're not passing judgment. They're not putting a value on it. When little kids talk about, oh, that person's black or that person's white or whatever, they're not putting a value on the skin color. They're just pointing out what they see. And I think, as people, in terms of our humanity, if we just think back to how children view the world, we don't have to work too hard to meet the needs of diverse communities. That
Yeah.
it's just a fact around us. It's natural. We share, we care, we you know, it's okay to say skin color. We don't sugarcoat it. Diversity isn't about, you know, calling a Christmas tree a holiday tree. That's my favorite line to use. It's still a Christmas tree. And if you don't want to call it a Christmas tree, call it a pine tree or whatever it is. Cedar, spruce, whatever.
Yeah. I know. I use a wheelchair, and when my niece is playing with her toys, she's always building ramps and making entryways accessible for me because that's what she knows. Being a part of her life is normal. But
Yep.
for a lot of children, that's not the case. They're not, they're not taught about, oh, how does your
Well,
aunt get?
children are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Children are absolutely amazing. So my sister has the same eye condition as me, and she's much younger. Her kids are much younger. And she was explaining to one of her kids, like, I can't see that. And he said, why not? And she was explaining all that to him. And then she said to me, your Auntie Rabia can't see either. So I was at their house and I said, oh, I want to sit on the rocking chair. Where's the rocking chair? And he came to me and goes, I'll show you. And he took my hand and he walked me to it,
Oh.
unhinged. And that kid is not very social with me. So, but he got it. This is a 4-year old,
Mm-hmm.
like it was just so natural to him. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I can help you. Come, I'll show you with your hand.
I know something that seems so natural to
Yeah.
a 4-year-old should be even more natural to us by the time we get to adult age.
But unfortunately, we have values interjected into us by the adults around us as we grow up.
Mm-hmm.
So the attitudes around disability, the attitudes around race, around faith, all these attitudes are interjected and etched into our minds as we grow up because of all the adult chatter around us. And I think as adults, we don't realize that we're putting bias, prejudice, racism, discrimination in the minds of the children around us
Yeah. That's why.
without maybe even intentionally doing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So awareness, the inner work of always being curious and learning is so important.
Yep.
So, with the next question, how do you believe we can foster a society that values interdependence as much as independence?
Love it. I love that question. That's my favorite question. For me, independence is about me choosing what I want, how I want it, what I want to do, how I want to do it, all that kind of stuff. But I can't do it alone. It's we are interdependent as human beings. It's not about me, it's about we. And as soon as we have that interdependence recognized, we thrive. But because we compartmentalize disabled people into this one category, and we, talk about this independent living and all this kind of stuff, we design everything to only cater to the individual without recognizing that as an individual, they are part of a family and a community, and there's interdependencies. And if we work from appreciating and valuing those interdependencies and design supports and services that enhance those interdependencies for the sake of well-being and belonging, we will have people thrive more in society.
Yeah, I think that goes not only for disability advocacy, this space that we're talking about in terms of human rights and making the world a more accessible, inclusive place, but really all different fields and sectors.
Yep. And it's give and take, right? Like I depend on people for certain things, but they also depend on me for certain things.
Rather that be tangible or intangible.
Yeah. So as human beings, we are interdependent.
hmm Yeah, hopefully as we become more aware and conscious as a group, we realize that. I just read a very uh, discouraging little piece
Yeah.
yesterday about how it's going to, I do believe they use the word impossible to lower the global temperature um, by 2030 or 2031 or whatever that year was. And the thing is, this planet is our planet. It's not, you know, individual people's planet.
Exactly.
And realizing the interdependency in that. But I am going on a tangent, so let me move on to the next question, which is what insights have you gained about the nature of human connection and community through your work with diverse populations?
We can connect at so many levels. And as people with disabilities, when, my thing has always been like, you know, when you solve people's problems, you win over their hearts and minds. And for people with disabilities, particularly for families of individuals with intellectual disabilities, when you offer support and services for them, like although we, in this space that I'm in right now at DEEN Support Services, we offer culturally and spiritually responsive services for people with disabilities. We are open to everybody from a human rights lens. And we find that people with disabilities and their families respect and appreciate that coming together of community, regardless of some of our values that might be different. And but the main thing is we are bonding over our lived experience of disability. And families as caregivers, moms, like that really brings them together regardless of other differences. So you really build bridges with diverse communities through finding common ground around any common cause. That's one of the things I've learned in life. And around any common cause, for example, even in my neighborhood, our common cause was we didn't want a big building in our backyard, and that brought all of us together.
Very well said. Thank you, Rabia. And we have just a few more minutes here before we get timed out. But was there anything that I didn't ask you that you felt was important to address?
No, I think you've asked me a lot that I wasn't necessarily thinking about. So I hope I provided you the answers that you were hoping to hear. The only thing I would say is I'm concerned today that there's, mass disablement happening for various reasons, especially through the ruthlessness of humanity, that there are people being disabled by the minute through violence and war, that today we have the greatest number of children amputees in a little piece of land called Gaza. And the world's silent, not recognizing this. And the disability community globally is not necessarily, you know, crying out about this. And, we have global leaders who just are not caring about disabled people and are, in fact, stigmatizing disability more and more with their attack on human rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion today. So we are living in very turbulent times, but I am the forever optimist and hopeful. And I have hope that we will come through this to a better tomorrow. But we have to be aware and we have to be prepared to stand our ground as disabled people, challenging leaders and systems to not leave us behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so awesome that you're in a lot of the important places where change happens, where you are able to be proactive. And also, I really appreciate you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your views to listeners and really getting people to be passionate about the issues and really be proactive like yourself and act on and move forward with these issues that we talked about today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabia. Any last words before we got less than a minute left?
No last words, just if we don't, as disabled people, stand up for ourselves, nobody else is going to stand for us.
Yes, that is very correct. Thank you so much for your time today, Rabia. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.